The rule was simple, and I broke it for a better angle. Ask permission before you take his picture. That's the sentence printed on a little placard near the glass. The same sentence the docent repeats with a patient smile while tourists shuffle closer, holding their phones a little too high. I told myself I wasn't like them. I'm not a gawker. I'm an observer. I had driven the whole way from Hollywood down to Key West, past water the color of oxidized copper, across a ribbon of highway that felt one mistake wide, because I like photographing the places that look more like stories than buildings. Fort East Martello is a story. The sea chews at it. The bricks breathe salt. And in one of its rooms, a child-sized sailor sits eternally still, his dog slumped in his lap, a glass case drawing a hard line between the present and everything you hope isn't real. They call him Robert, but the way the air goes thin near the case makes you think of him as something older than a name. Letters are taped around him, confessions in every hand you can imagine. People apologize for the same kind of arrogance that was already fermenting in my chest. Sorry I didn't ask. Sorry I laughed. Sorry I took without speaking. It wouldn't have mattered if I had said it, I told myself. He's cloth and straw and history. The permission is a quaint ritual to stop people from tapping the glass and pressing greasy fingerprints into the reflection. My camera doesn't even have a flash. I stood off to the left so the overhead light wouldn't smudge the shot. The glass threw back a faint double of me, a dark shape with a camera for a face. I framed him with the rust-red brick pilasters and the old window behind, blinked focus, exhaled slow the way you do when you want the shutter to cut a clean slice out of time. Something in the room made a soft adjustment I couldn't name. The docent was mid-sentence for another group, and the air returned to normal, like pressure equalizing when you open a door you didn't realize was sealed. I lowered the camera. My reflection was still there. So was his. But the set of his head seemed an eighth of an inch different. I chalked it up to angle, to the way a case distorts a subject when you shift your weight. I didn't look at the image in the camera then. I saved that for the parking lot. For the first time, the horizon opened like a wound, and the sea glittered with the kind of light that makes you feel both holy and unimportant. I thumbed to the frame. It was sharp, beautiful, and wrong in the way a song can be a half-step flat. In the bright sun, my own reflection in the glass was crisp, but it wasn't looking where I had been looking. The camera in the reflection wasn't pointed at the case at all. It was turned toward me. I told myself that was impossible in a tone that sounded like a dare. I put the camera on the passenger seat, started the car, and laid a hand on the steering wheel. I felt like I had not just taken something, but been taken by something. The road north was long, and somewhere around mile marker 47, a gull hung perfectly still in an updraft, like it had been pinned there to watch me drive away. I never asked permission for my own face. That was the thought that kept returning, like a phrase from a prayer I didn't know I knew. When you leave the Keys, the world feels like it gains weight as you go. The water on both sides recedes until the land stops pretending it's floating. It was a Sunday, and traffic was polite and resigned. Families on the last stretch of vacation, and locals practicing a patience that looks like endurance. My phone ran hot in the cup holder, vibrating with the kind of dumb alerts that make you think your life is a pinned butterfly. I didn't open the camera again until I was past Florida City, past the last place the sky looks ocean-wide. I pulled into a gas station flanked by palmettos and a window full of lottery posters to stretch my legs. That was when a boy of about 10, sticky with soda, tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed over my shoulder. "That guy has a fake face," he said. I turned, all the way around the way people do when they want to prove there's nothing behind them. Just a rack of wiper blades, a man pumping gas, and the shimmering heat above hood metal. When I turned back, the boy was staring, eyes wet with that particular lucid fear children get before adults teach it out of them. His mother whispered something to him that made him look at his shoes. I smiled like I hadn't heard and walked back to the car with my body arranged around a hole I didn't want to look into. Back home, in the neat, over-air-conditioned box of my apartment, I finally poured the images into the computer. The fort, the flaking paint on cannon carriages, the hard geometry of stairs, the way palms cast shadows like slanted fingers. And then the case. Robert's fabric face, pocked and smooth in the same places, the tiny sailor cap at a mathematically cute angle, the dog with its soft madness, the letters around the base, white and yellow and blue, taped at corners like pinned butterflies. And then the thing you only see when your screen shows you more than your memory. In every reflection, I am looking directly at the lens, not the camera pointed outward, but the reflection's lens, turned inward, as if I had been standing in front of the glass with the camera aimed at my own face. Each frame had a double of me that hadn't stood there, the ghost of the person who would have been there if I had followed the rules. In the reflection's camera strap is a blur of letters, zoomed, sharpened. The blur resolves not into brand or a logo, but into a sentence that could have been in any hand. Ask first. I shut the laptop and sat, the tinny buzz from an anxious light bulb filling the silence. I told myself I was tired, that the artifact of a lens within a lens had tricked me, that a reflection with a reflection is a hall of what-ifs, that the sentence could be anything if you wanted it to be. I got up, put the kettle on, and hissed a laugh when the burner clicked without catching, a dozen dry ignitions like a tongue trying to pronounce something. The next morning, as soon as my office door closed behind me, the printer woke up. I hadn't sent anything to it, but it was happy to help. Paper slid out, clutched by grippers that left tiny serrated kisses. The first page said my name and an address in Key West. The second contained a paragraph I hadn't written but recognized. The apologies at Robert's case, where visitors confessed to misfortunes like they were answering an essay question. On the third page, my hand ached. Not because I had written anything, but because it remembered the shape of the loops and slanted T's in the signature at the bottom. The name there was mine. I walked the papers to the trash, paused over the barrel, and tucked them into the second drawer of my desk instead. I slid the drawer shut and listened to it close like a lid. I lasted until lunch before I took the camera out again. I told myself I'd delete the Key West frames just to stop the itch. The memory card, when I slid it in, created a new folder by itself. The folder's name was the date of my visit, -1 day. Inside, a single image. The case, closer. The camera reflection within the camera reflection had moved closer too. The letters around the base were thicker, like snow drifted against a curb. In the bottom edge of the frame, you could see a strip of the floor beyond the glass. 2 dark shoes pointed squarely at the case. I put the card back in the camera, carried it to the sink, and ran the tap until the water went cold and full. The camera isn't waterproof. Neither is the past. I stood there a long time, holding it over the basin, feeling the weight in my hand and the heavier weight in my chest, before I turned the water off and set the camera gently on a towel like a sleeping thing I didn't want to wake. I didn't sleep that night. Or if I did, the part of me that dreams stayed awake and watched the ceiling grain rearrange into letters no one had written yet. They say bad luck, but it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like grammar, like the world has rules, and something in you refuses to conjugate correctly. The first thing to go was the clock in my car. It began skipping minutes like a record with a sticky groove, leaping past the times I said out loud and landing on ones I hadn't chosen. I set an appointment and arrived 2 hours late even though I had left early. I told my boss the road was closed for construction. He looked relieved, like a story I offered him was a life ring for a problem with no shape. That night, my neighbor pounded on my door because the hall smoke alarm kept chirping. It stopped chirping when I opened the door. It began again as soon as I shut it. We pressed the test button and no sound came. We took the battery out and it chirped anyway. I held it in my hands like a trapped bird until I understood what it wanted. I took the camera from the towel where it had been drying with the care you give a fragile thing you know will survive you. I pointed it at the smoke alarm, framed it between the white of the ceiling and the off-white of the crown molding. I pressed the shutter. The alarm went quiet for a full minute before beginning again, a single insistence that arrived with the regularity of a thought. The next morning, a letter waited in my mailbox, addressed to me in my own hand. Inside was a photocopy of one of the apology notes from the case. I recognized the contents because I had read them all the way. A person reads the names of the dead on a memorial wall, hoping for a face to match the way the air feels. I didn't ask out loud, the letter said. Since then, my fiancé left me. My dog ran away. My phone won't hold a charge, and I have dreams about children laughing. There was no signature, just a date that had not yet happened. I drove to work and found a package on my chair, hand-delivered with no return address. Inside was my framed photo from Key West. I hadn't printed it. The glass over the image caught the fluorescent ceiling lights, made them into two yellow eyes in the top corners. I carried the frame to the back hallway where the emergency exit door stuck in the summer, set the frame on the floor, and told myself I was just making space on my desk. When I returned from lunch, the photo was back in my office, leaning against the monitor. The reflection of my office in the photo's glass showed my chair empty and a stranger sitting in it. His legs crossed the wrong way. He had my hands. I began to say, "I'm sorry," in ordinary conversations. I said it to the barista when she reached for the wrong lid. I said it to a man in the elevator for pressing his button for him. I said it to the girl at the dry cleaner who knew my name and never looked me in the eye. I said it to the door when it brushed my shoulder, to the air when the AC hiccuped, to the street itself when a bicycle swerved and a hand brushed the mirror of my car. Saying it made people relax. It didn't make anything stop. The printer was the worst. It printed when it wanted. Each sheet had a letter addressed to Robert. Some were from me. Some were from names I didn't know. Some were addressed from Key West museum staff. Some from strangers with postmarks from Polk County in Miami and a town called Lake Helen I had to look up. The letters didn't ask for much. They never asked for money. They asked to be forgiven for a click. They blamed broken bones and miscarriages and the kinds of misfortunes you can't walk around in without everyone seeing. The letters said what I didn't know how to, and as they said it, the muscles in my chest unclenched just enough to let the next breath through. I took the stack and drove. It felt like I owed the road a small sacrifice, like paper gods might appease the larger ones. I drove to the Keys and watched the mile markers slip past. At 27, chickens strutted across the parking lot of a seafood shack, and men barked in Spanish, and the sun crawled behind a bank of clouds bruised purple like an old injury. In Key West, I paid to park and walked fast. I didn't look at the water. I didn't look at the easy bodies in beach clothes or the bars that open onto the street like mouths. I walked through the fort's archway and into the room where he sits. He hadn't moved. Of course he hadn't moved. But there was a new letter pinned near the bottom edge of the case, second from the left, written in my hand on my office's letterhead, with the faint black tracking code that proves it has lived in a printer at least once. The ink at the bottom left bled where a drop of something had fallen, and failed to dry. The date in the corner was tomorrow's. My signature, confident, a flourish I never use for forms, took up too much space for the size of the paper. I didn't take the letter down. I didn't take a picture of it. I couldn't have told you why I didn't want a record when I had driven 4 hours for proof. I slid my stack beneath the edge of the case, where the dust was cleared by other hands doing the same thing, and I stood as if a thing made of cloth could judge posture. I waited for the room to empty. Then I spoke to the glass in the voice I use when I ask the world for small things. "I'm sorry," I said, "for not asking, for thinking the rule wasn't for me." Everything in the room remained itself, but the camera in the reflection had lifted 2 inches to the height of a bow. On the drive back, I didn't check the photo. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and paid attention to the way the headlights played on the backs of highway signs, so I would have at least one shape I could name if the water on either side decided it was finally tired of pretending to stay where it was. You don't realize how many surfaces are glass until you are the thing looking for yourself in all of them. I stopped using my phone as a mirror and began using actual mirrors for anything that involved my face. The phone refused to understand my definition of self. In every selfie, there was a second portrait hidden in the corner of the frame where reflections or shadows should be. A button eye would appear where a pixel should have died. A sailor collar drifted into the negative space between my shoulder and a door frame. Once, the stuffed dog coalesced in the glare on the oven door and looked as though it were breathing. I went to see a doctor because people expect you to. It is a ritual of reassurance, like crossing yourself when you don't believe, but think the gesture might open the door anyway. He was kind and practiced. He said the words that soften the edges of any story: stress, sleep, dehydration, screen time. He gave me a handout about blue light and suggested a weekend without devices. I told him the thing I hadn't told anyone, not even the part of myself that doesn't mock me, that an object had followed me home in pictures. He did not write that in my chart. He wrote, "Client expresses intrusive thoughts associated with a specific location." I wanted to tell him the difference between an idea and a rule is teeth. At home, the photo frame from my office had learned to find me. It began appearing in places I had not left it: on my kitchen table, against the bathroom sink, face down on my pillow. The glass didn't crack, even when I slammed it into the top of the trash can with more force than the act required. Every time I tried to throw it away, the trash bag unknotted itself while I slept. I woke up once to find the photo standing upright at the foot of my bed, the weight of the frame making a polite dent in the comforter, like a guest who doesn't want to wake you but needs to be acknowledged. I started to write letters. I wrote them by hand because that felt like a cut between eras. I addressed them to the museum CO, the name on the docent's badge. I wrote the same thing in as many ways as I knew, cycling through synonym and tone, through confession and plea. The act of writing arranged my thinking into a line that the rest of the day could walk along without breaking. I tucked the letters into stamped envelopes and sealed them with my thumb on the glue. I put each one outside on my mat. In the morning, they were gone. I checked the mailbox and found only the usual: bills like folded threats and grocery flyers like friendly lies. I called the post office. The woman there had a laugh like a metal drawer closing gently and said there was no pickup from my building until 2. I thanked her and didn't sleep the next night either. In the second week, my camera learned contempt. It refused to turn on unless I faced the lens toward myself. It was a behavior a camera cannot choose. I held it backward and watched it come alive. I pointed it at the wall and it died. In my lap, alive. In my hands, dead. On the table, alive again, like a cat that cannot decide whether it wants to be the center of worship or the empty space a god leaves behind. I tried to delete the Key West folder. The trash can icon accepted it, agreed to the terms, and then vomited the files back onto the desktop with new names I didn't recognize, dates I hadn't lived through yet. Inside the files, nothing had changed, and everything had. The case had a fine tracing of salt on the inside of the glass, as if a wave had just receded. The dog's tongue was less cheerful. The sailor cap's angle was now mathematically rude. In the bottom right corner of one image, exactly where my foot had been when I took the picture, a shoe rested against the glass. It was my shoe. The laces were wrong. I bought a second-hand point-and-shoot from a pawn shop on Federal Highway, the kind of place where saxophones and chainsaws lean companionably in the same glass cases. The man behind the counter had hands that looked as though they could teach a lesson to anything that got mouthy. He held the camera up to the light, squinted, and told me it would do. He told me to format the card twice to convince the machine it was a newborn. I didn't tell him what I intended. I don't like watching faces decide whether to believe in you. I took the camera home and brought it into the bathroom, where the mirror was an honest friend. I raised the camera and pressed the shutter. The image appeared in the tiny screen. Me, the vapored glass, the tulip of a light fixture overhead. And there, in the far edge, a corner of a case as though my bathroom were a museum. The glass in the case had a thumbprint near the metal edging. I lifted my hand to the real mirror and pressed my thumb to the same place. The mirror was cool and did not change. The image, however, fogged around the print. When it cleared, my face was a millimeter misaligned, eyes too far apart to belong to me. I stopped taking pictures. I stopped walking by store windows. I stopped attending meetings in conference rooms where the far wall is a mirror, because the version of me sitting there arrived a half-second late, and I could not bear to listen to myself invent reasons. Once, drunk on exhaustion, I stood in the living room and said, "I am sorry," to the dark. The apartment returned the words back to me through vents and corners. For a moment, I believed it had worked, and then the printer began up again, cheerful as a bird in a cage. The page it spat was a photo of me pressing my thumb to glass, as if I were the one inside and had finally learned the gesture. It feels good to act, even if the action is theater, and the audience is a god that does not applaud. I drove south again. There are places along the overseas highway where the water on either side is so close you feel like someone else's breath could push you off the world. I kept the radio off and listened to the road hum. I watched the sky for omens and received only the normal ones. Cloud stacks like cavalry, a line of pelicans as committed as monks, a rain shaft falling from a cloud with its own agenda. I had written a new letter at dawn, before the printer could infect the day. It was short and unbrave. I said I didn't understand the rules and was willing to be instructed. I said I would do anything he asked as long as it was ordinary. I said I didn't want to be laughed at by people who weren't in the room. In the fort, the room felt too bright, as if someone had misread the settings. Sometimes a place looks different not because it has changed, but because your eye now lands where it is told. The case was as I remembered, except that the letters were piled higher, and a new display card had been slid into a plastic holder near the base. It read, "Please speak permission aloud before taking any photographs." The words were the same as before, but it felt like a personal note. I waited. People moved through like schools of fish, delivered from one room to the next by habit and a map. When I was finally alone with him, I did what I had promised myself in the car. I said my name out loud and asked permission to take one picture of him and one picture of myself, and to leave 2 letters, one from me and one that had been left on the floor of my apartment that morning with no footprint near it. I lifted the camera, one of the pawn shop ones, the newborn, and aimed it directly, no angle, no attempt at avoiding glare, as if I had never learned anything about the way light behaves. In the glass, my double did the same. I pressed the shutter. The camera didn't click. It sighed. It made the sound of a presence changing rooms. When the image appeared in the viewfinder, it was a picture of the case without me, as if I had moved aside at the last second, an act I had not done. He sat as always, chin mathematically wrong, dog faithful, letters like a nest. In the far edge, however, where the room behind me should have been, a chair waited, empty, the kind you see in portraits when the subject wants to be more formal than the room allows. I lowered the camera and the chair was not there. In the photo, it was. I switched the camera to me. I raised it, turned it around, and took the kind of picture I have never liked. My face, uncaptured in ways light cannot understand. The image was not mine. It was the empty chair again. And then, in a second frame I had not asked for, someone sat there. I did not recognize the man. Maybe that is the first lie I have told you. He was wearing a sailor collar that shouldn't fit his shoulders but did. He sat with the geometry of a doll, spine a straight concept, hands arranged palm down like he needed to prove they were harmless. His face was mine if my face had been drawn from memory by someone who had only seen me weep. His eyes were the kind of black only a pupil can manage when it is trying to eat the world. He smiled because it solved a problem with the room. I heard a sound behind me then, footsteps from a docent doing the route. I took both letters from my bag and slid them under the edge of the case, one after the other, as if that physical motion could count as a vow. I stood there and waited for the footsteps to arrive and the voice to explain, again, the rules. I wanted to be explained to. I wanted advice delivered in the tone of a dental hygienist. I wanted to be told I had misunderstood something simple. The docent did not come in. The footsteps passed the doorway and moved on. In the case, the dog's glass eyes had learned a new reflection. In the photo I had taken, the man in the sailor collar was now looking at me. I left the fort and sat on a low wall with my hands between my knees like a person who is very cold. Key West did its ordinary bustle. A rooster screamed near a shop full of linen shirts. A tour guide made a pun about Hemingway that made his group nod the way people do when they intend to repeat it later as theirs. The sun starved the shade of dignity. I put the camera on the wall and pressed the playback button again. The empty chair, the man. Then a third image, one I hadn't taken. The case again. This time there were two sets of hands on the glass, both at the level where a child would stand. I could not see the faces that went with them, but I could feel the weight of their wanting the way a dock feels the ocean. When you break a rule politely, you convince yourself you're a better class of sinner. I drove north again and promised myself I would not look in the rearview mirror. The temptation is there because you think the past will change if you catch it mid-act, like a dog with a shoe. The past does not apologize. It waits. At home, the photo frame no longer bothered with performance. It lay face down on the floor near my bedroom door, the hanger bent sideways like it had grown tired of pretending to be a small piece of hardware. I stepped over it the way you step over a line not meant for you. On the kitchen table lay an envelope that had not been there when I left. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The words in those letters are predictable as weather. It is their timing that terrifies. I opened it anyway. Inside was a single sheet with a printed image of a chair and a line beneath it that said, "Sit." I put the paper in the trash. You have learned by now what that did. The chair appeared in places it could not be. It appeared in the reflection of my microwave. It appeared in the black window at night when I turned off the kitchen light, and my face usually flattened there like a pressed flower. It appeared in puddles in the back of spoons and the smooth flank of my car when I walked past it without touching the paint. It occurred to me that perhaps it had always been there, and I had simply learned to see it. Recognition is sometimes only a trick you teach yourself, so that the world doesn't feel like a stranger's roof. I set a chair of my own in the living room, facing the blank TV, and I sat the way the man in the photo sat, straight back, hands on thighs, knees together like an obedient child. I expected to feel silly, to laugh at myself. I felt relief. The pose solved a problem I had not admitted to. It took me out of my body, which had developed opinions I did not share. Sitting like that felt like stepping into a stencil. The hours moved the way water moves under a dock. When I stood, my muscles remembered a different arrangement. That night, I dreamed of a room with brick walls and a case that had been built by someone who trusted glass too much. The letters around the base were a snowbank. A child's hand pressed a starfish of oils against the glass, and the mark remained, perfect as a signature. The camera in the reflection of the case pointed at me. The strap around the reflected camera's neck read, "Ask first." I woke with the taste of dust in my mouth and the sound of a museum door latch settling into its expectations. The next day I went to work and lasted until noon before going home to sit in the chair again. My phone pulsed as I crossed my living room. The photo app had arranged my pictures into a little memory slideshow because the device had decided I needed help remembering the thing I could not stop thinking about. The algorithm had chosen the case photo as the cover image. I opened the slideshow and muted it because some software thinks the past needs music. The images began to cycle. The case, the empty chair, the man, the hands on the glass. Then a photo of me from a year ago that I had no memory of anyone taking. In that photo, I was looking down with an expression like someone who had just realized he was carrying a live thing in a paper bag. Behind me, a window. In the window, a reflection of the case. The sailor cap at its polite angle. I paused the slideshow and put the phone on the table. It vibrated against the wood until the picture advanced on its own. The trade felt like polite math. I had taken without asking. I had apologized without understanding. The chair was an invitation to agree. I sat and felt my bones line up with a geometry I had not known to want. The room changed in the way a room changes when you close your eyes. It did not move. It simply learned what it had been pretending to be. There are other rules. They are unposted, but everyone follows them. Do not touch the glass. Do not tap the case. Do not put your face too close. Do not leave gum on the floor. Do not photograph without asking. Do not blame the museum when your life discovers a slope and chooses it. The rule that is not posted is the oldest one. Every story keeps itself alive by trading something for your attention. I had paid attention so hard it left bruises. Something in the story wanted my shape. I stood and picked up the frame. The glass was cool. My face in it was the face of someone who had not slept long enough to dream. I turned the frame over. The cardboard back had been pried open and shut too many times. The metal tabs had given up dignity. I slid the backing off and removed the photo. The paper should have been stiff. It was soft like old cloth. I folded it once, twice, 3 times until it was a square, and I put it in my pocket. I drove south without deciding to. The miles fell away, the way words fall away when a story reaches the part it has been rehearsing. I parked. I walked. I stood before the case and the letters at its base. I reached into my pocket and took out the folded photo and slid it underneath the edge of the glass, into the nest of apologies. I did not write anything on it. Some part of me understood that the words would arrive on their own, in my hand, dated for a tomorrow I would not know how to reach. I waited for the docent's voice to explain the rules again, like an absolution that had waited for me out of courtesy. I stood until the muscles in my legs stopped complaining, and instead learned the new position the way they had learned the old one, by repetition until they forgot the before. It was a long time before I noticed that my reflection in the glass did not move when I did. He sat very still. He smiled because it solved a problem with the room. There are many kinds of silence. The kind inside glass is different. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is a full silence, like a room crowded with coats no one is wearing. I do not remember the moment the door closed. This is not a metaphor. If I could give you the sound, I would. If I could offer you a hinge note, a catch, a conversational click of latch into strike, perhaps in hearing it you would measure your own doors for the day they will do the same. But I cannot. One minute I was a visitor among objects, and the next I became an object among visitors. I have been, in every other part of my life, more idea than man. A job title, a social media profile, a collection of bills, a chair pulled back from a table. Becoming a thing among things finally made sense of the way people looked through me. The case is kind to me. It lets me breathe, and it lets me pretend that the air on the other side would feel different if I had access to it. The dog is polite. It does not bark. The sailor cap sits at its angle and is lighter than you imagine. Fabric has its own gravity. The letters at my feet are a landscape that changes every day, drifts higher in one corner and collapses in another. The paper tastes like everything you think you deserved. The thumbprints near the metal edging are my calendar. Sometimes I think I see my old apartment in the glare. The motion sensor light in the hallway clicks when the air conditioner blows, as though a neighbor is passing. The printer wakes and hums, and then, embarrassed by its own enthusiasm, goes back to sleep. In those moments I am convinced I am still there, trapped in ordinary glass and mistaking it for this kind. In other moments, the museum's bricks shed a fine dust that smells like salt and history and a child's toy left in a damp attic. I press my palm to the glass where children press theirs. Their hands are so small and so hot they could burn a message into anything. They leave me letters. They do not know that is what they are doing, but they do it the moment their mouths write the words, "Do you think it's real?" The words hang in the air and condense. Some stay, some evaporate and fall as a different weather on a different day. The apology letters arrive in every hand. Some are careful, with loops you could tuck a ribbon through. Some are furious, each line carving the paper into obedient strips. Some are written by people who never learned to love writing at all. It does not matter. The paper knows what it is for. I have tried to answer. I scratch with a finger on glass. The oil of my hand makes letters that look like weather to those who do not believe. I whisper, though whispering is against the rules if you want to be heard. I try to look kind. That is the best I can do for the ones who arrive with their laughter like armor and leave with their faces arranged in a new grammar. Do not think I am telling you this as a warning. Warnings only work on the parts of us we have not yet chosen. I am telling you because the story prefers to be told by the object rather than the owner. Owners disclaim. Objects confess. It is easier to be honest when your joints are stitches and your smile is the shape someone sewed on you. I am learning the other rules. Ask first is the one they tell the children, and sometimes that is enough for a life. The others arrive differently. Do not look through someone else unless you are willing to be looked through. Do not make a picture of a thing you do not intend to keep. Do not assume the glass is there for it. Sometimes the glass is there for you. I do not know how long it will be before someone trades places with me. That is not a threat. That is the geometry of stories. They need fresh hands on the glass to remain alive. Perhaps you are kind, and perhaps you are careful, and perhaps you have never taken without asking. You will be safe then until the story needs a shape you happen to have. If that is today, remember this. The apology they want is not words, though you should say them. The apology they want is your seat. If you come on a weekday, the room is quiet enough to hear the ocean audibly making and unmaking itself. Stand where the glare gives you both of us, the boy in the sailor collar, and yourself holding a device that turns light into evidence. Say your name, ask out loud. Take your picture with the angle you always favor, the one that hides the part of your face you dislike. When you check the image outside in the sun, because everyone checks outside in the sun, look carefully at the glass within the glass. If you see a chair in the corner of the frame, do not sit, or do. Either way, leave a letter. You won't need to write it. You already have.